or the other mother. I woke up one night to find my mother standing at the foot of my bed, her silhouette framed by the moonlight spilling through my window. She looked just like my mom, with her soft brown hair falling loosely around her shoulders and that familiar smile that always made me feel safe. But something felt off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but a shiver ran down my spine. "Sweetheart, why are you still awake?" she asked, her voice sweet yet strangely hollow. I was just reading," I stammered, forcing a smile. "Can't sleep." "Don't you worry," she said, her smile widening. "I'll be right here if you need anything." I nodded, and she turned to leave. As she walked out, I noticed her shadow seemed to linger longer than it should have, stretching across the floor like a dark omen. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to push away the unease. The next morning, I awoke to the smell of pancakes wafting through the house. My mom was in the kitchen, humming a tune that felt oddly unfamiliar. I crept downstairs, still trying to shake off the feeling from the night before. "Good morning, sunshine," she chirped, flipping a pancake with a skill that made it look easy. "I made your favorite." I smiled weakly, sitting at the table. As I watched her move about the kitchen, I noticed her hands were unusually smooth, almost too perfect. My mom always had small scars and rough patches from cooking and gardening. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the thought. Maybe I was just being silly. After breakfast, I wanted to go outside and ride my bike. As I slipped on my shoes, I caught my mom watching me from the doorway, her smile unnaturally wide. "Have fun, dear. Just be careful," she called, her voice echoing in a way that made my skin prickle. As I rode around the neighborhood, I tried to focus on the wind in my hair and the sun on my face, but the feeling of something wrong gnawed at me. I decided to visit my best friend, Sam, hoping he could distract me. When I told him about my mom acting strange, he laughed. "You're imagining things. Moms are just moms. They can be weird sometimes." "But this is different. She stood in my room last night just watching me," I insisted, my voice rising in urgency. Sam shrugged. "Maybe she was just checking on you. You know how they are." Frustrated, I left his house and headed home. As I approached my front door, I saw my mom in the living room, her back turned to me. She was arranging flowers in a vase, her movements fluid and almost too precise. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "Mom?" I called, stepping inside. She turned around, her smile instantly brightening. "Welcome back, sweetheart. Did you have fun?" "Yeah, I guess," I mumbled. But I could feel the weight of her gaze on me, like she was studying me, dissecting my every move. That night I lay in bed, the shadows dancing on the walls. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I kept glancing at the door, half expecting my mom to peek in again. And then, just as I was about to drift off, I heard it. A soft creak, the unmistakable sound of someone slowly opening my door. I froze, heart pounding. The figure that stepped into the room was my mother, but her eyes were unnaturally bright, almost glowing in the darkness. She stood there for what felt like an eternity, just watching me. I wanted to scream, to call for help, but the words stuck in my throat. Then, she smiled that same eerie smile. "Sweet dreams, my little star," she whispered, closing the door softly behind her. I could hardly sleep that night, tossing and turning under the weight of my fears. The next day, I decided to confront her. "Mom, are you feeling okay?" I asked at breakfast, trying to sound casual. "Of course, dear. Why do you ask?" she replied, her voice bright but with an undertone that made me shudder. "You seem different," I said, my heart racing as I spoke. "Different? No, no, I'm exactly the same, she insisted, her smile faltering just for a moment. But then she leaned in closer, and I could smell something sweet and sickly on her breath. You know what they say, darling. Change is good. I felt a chill grip my spine. I decided to talk to the neighbors, hoping they could see what I saw. I knocked on Mrs. Thompson's door, my hands trembling. She opened it, her face warm and inviting. "Hello, dear. What's the matter?" she asked, concern in her eyes. "It's my mom. She's acting weird, like she's not really my mom anymore," I blurted out, desperation clawing at my throat. Mrs. Thompson chuckled softly, brushing it off. "Oh dear, that's just how mothers are sometimes. They worry too much. You're just growing up, and it's making you see things differently." I felt the weight of disbelief pressing down on me. "But," I started, but she gently closed the door, leaving me standing alone on her porch. Defeated, I returned home. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the yard. I walked into the living room and found my mother sitting on the couch, knitting with a speed that seemed unnatural. Her fingers moved deftly, but her eyes were fixed on me, unblinking. "Do you want to join me?" she asked, her voice dripping with sweetness. "No, I'm okay," I replied, backing away slowly. As night fell, I lay in bed again, every sound amplifying my fears. I kept glancing at the door, knowing she would come back to check on me, and when she did, I was ready. "Mom?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, darling," she answered, peeking through the crack of my door, her face half hidden in shadow. "Can you leave the door open? I don't want to feel so alone," I said, forcing myself to sound brave. "Of course, sweetheart," she replied, her smile widening unnaturally. That night, I lay wide awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that it was all in my head. But soon, I felt the familiar sensation of being watched. I turned my head slowly, and there she was, my mother, her face pressed against the door, peering into my room. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, and her lips curled into a smile that sent icy terror coursing through me. I should have screamed, should have run, but I was frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. "Sweetheart," she whispered, her voice tinged with something sinister. "Why don't you come out and play? I've made a special surprise just for you." I gasped, pulling the covers over my head, my heart racing. I could hear her softly humming the same tune from the kitchen, a haunting melody that echoed in my mind. "Mom, please," I called out, my voice shaking. "You're scaring me." "Scaring you? Oh, darling, that's not my intention at all," she said sweetly, but there was a darkness in her voice that made my skin crawl. "I just want to make you happy." In a moment of bravery, I flung the covers off and bolted for the door, but when I opened it, she was gone. My heart raced as I stepped into the dark hallway, the silence pressing down on me. "Mom," I called, but the house was still. I crept down the stairs, each step feeling like a mile, the darkness closing in around me. I reached the living room and froze. There she was, sitting on the couch, her back to me. "I was waiting for you, my sweet," she said, her voice a melody dripping with something dark. "I thought you'd never come." "Mom, what are you doing?" I shouted, my voice breaking. She turned slowly, her smile stretching impossibly wide. "I've been preparing something special. You'll love it." I backed away, fear coursing through me. "What are you talking about? You're not my mom." "Oh, but I am," she said, her voice shifting to a low, menacing growl. "I've always been your mother, but now I can be so much more." In a flash, she lunged toward me, her fingers elongated and claw-like. I turned and ran, darting toward the front door, but it slammed shut before I could reach it. I pounded on the door, screaming for help, but the walls echoed my cries back at me, mocking me. "Shh, sweetie," she cooed, her voice dripping with malice. "It'll all be over soon." I turned, desperately searching for a way out, but she was everywhere, her laughter chilling my bones. I stumbled into the kitchen and grabbed a knife, my hands shaking as I pointed it at her. "Stay back!" I shouted, my voice cracking. She tilted her head, her smile never faltering. "Oh, darling, you don't need that. I only want what's best for you." With a sudden movement, she lunged toward me and I swung the knife wildly, catching her arm. A sickening sound filled the air, and I gasped in horror as I watched her skin shimmer and peel back, revealing something dark and twisted beneath. What are you?" I stammered, backing away, my heart racing. "I'm your true mother," she hissed, her voice low and guttural, "and soon you'll be just like me." With a final surge of adrenaline, I bolted past her, flinging the back door open and racing into the night. The cool air hit my face, filling me with momentary clarity. I ran toward the woods behind our house, desperate for escape. But as I sprinted through the trees, I felt her presence behind me, stalking me like prey. I could hear her laughter, echoing off the trees, growing closer and closer. "Come back, sweetheart," she called, her voice a twisted mockery of love. "We're just starting to have fun." I ran faster, branches clawing at my skin, the darkness closing in around me. But just when I thought I found a moment of safety, I tripped and fell, the ground rushing up to meet me. I turned to look back, gasping for breath, and saw her standing at the edge of the tree line, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "You can't hide from me," she said, her voice a chilling whisper that sent shivers through my entire body. I scrambled to my feet, feeling the weight of despair settle over me. "Help! Somebody help me!" I screamed, but the woods only echoed my cries. Then, in an instant, she was upon me, her fingers grasping my shoulders, pulling me close. "It's time to come home," she whispered, her voice now a song that wrapped around me like a warm blanket. As I felt her grip tighten, the world began to fade, the darkness swallowing me whole. I could hear her laughter ringing in my ears, a sweet melody that promised love and safety, even as it twisted into something dark and sinister. And then, everything went black. I awoke in my bed, sunlight filtering through the curtains. My heart raced as I looked around, disoriented. Everything felt normal, yet there was an unsettling stillness in the air. I rushed downstairs, my heart pounding. My mother was in the kitchen, humming that same eerie tune. She turned to me, her smile wide and welcoming. "Good morning, sweetheart. I made pancakes." I blinked, a sense of dread washing over me. "Mom, are you—" "Oh, darling," she said, stepping closer, her eyes gleaming with an otherworldly light. "I'm exactly the same as I've always been." And in that moment, I realized with a sinking dread that I was too late. The warmth of her embrace felt suffocating, the walls of my own home closing in, trapping me in a nightmare of my own making. The last remnants of my childhood innocence slipped away as I understood the truth. I had become just like her,